be sharing our youngest son, Tatum Samuel's birth story. If you know me or if you've watched my videos, you know that Tatum's pregnancy was pretty difficult in comparison to my first pregnancy. We had a few little hiccups, a few worries, I had blood pressure issues, and that affected me all the way to the end. I was diagnosed with preeclampsia right before I turned 39 weeks, and we did have to bump his delivery from Valentine's Day, February 14th, to February 12th to make sure he was safe and healthy. I did have a scheduled C-section. Our goal at the beginning of pregnancy was to try for a VBAC, but he never descended appropriately. He was never in a good position for me to try, and I really didn't want to have to try to go through all of that labor and then end up in a repeat C-section. So we did go with a repeat C-section. My first C-section was an emergency. Tatum's was planned, so it was kind of a smoother process. We went into the hospital. Our C-section was scheduled for noon, and we had to be there at 10:30. We got there right at 10:30 on the dot. At least I wasn't late because I'm always late. But we got up that morning, we got Lucas to his grandparents' house, and then we went on to the hospital, me and my husband. We got there at 10:30, and they said, "Your doctor's already ready to operate. Let's get you prepped and get you back." And we were not expecting that because they told us that she usually runs a little later from her morning surgeries, and to expect kind of a delay, not really to be taken back till like 1 or 2. So that's what we were expecting, but that was not the case at all. She was actually ready. She was in the hallway ready to talk to us. So they checked me in, they took me back and started prepping me, and it was just a totally different experience from Lucas's birth, because with Lucas I had labored for 20 hours. They just had to prep me in the bed, but for Tatum's C-section I just walked in. They do all of this prep work, and then I literally walked back to the OR. So Brandon videoed and took some photos at this point, and he was trying to update our families and things like that. They gave me the gown, undressed and put the gown on, and I had to answer a ton of questions, of course. They came in and did labs. They put my bracelets on. A lady came in and actually talked to us about placenta donation, which we decided to do. So that was neat. That was a new experience for us. And then when they were done with dressing me and all the blood work and everything, they gave Brandon scrubs. And I actually walked back to the OR. I just got out and walked back from, I was actually in a recovery room. They prepped you in the recovery room, and then you went to the OR, and then they brought you back to the recovery room. So I had the same room there. But I walked back, and they took me to the OR, and Brandon couldn't come in until after I had my spinal inserted. So I walked back to the OR with my doctor. I had a wonderful nurse that was there with me. I was really, really nervous about the spinal because with Lucas, I had a really bad epidural experience. The anesthesiologist said that my body is just not made to handle an epidural or a spinal because of how small my spinal cavity is. And he said if I ever needed one again, to get it as soon as possible. And it really scared me. I had a lot of pain, and they had a lot of difficulty inserting it. I was honestly afraid of permanent damage after him. So this time around, I met with the anesthesiologist beforehand. He said, "I have handpicked your anesthesia group today, and we're going to do the best we can." So I had to get up on the table, and the nurse was in front of me, and she was just talking to me and just kind of walking through what was going on, but also talking to me and trying to get my mind off of it. She was wonderful. And then the anesthesiologist, he did the spinal, and it was a much better experience than I had with Lucas. It was in within like 10 minutes. I didn't feel a ton of pain. There was a little bit of pain at the beginning, but then it was just a ton of pressure. Totally manageable, totally different experience. So I was really, really grateful for that, because that was one of my biggest fears of having another baby. And it was totally different than an epidural, because it takes effect almost immediately. When they inserted it, I mean, my feet just started, when he was like, it's in, you're good, I could immediately start feeling my legs warm and tingle, and I couldn't even get myself back on the bed. The nurses had to put me up and lay me down. And then you're laying in a T position with your arms lightly strapped down and everything. And so I was laying there, and they told me that when you're given anesthesia, your blood pressure comes down, and they said if you start feeling nauseated, if you start feeling, dizzy, to tell us immediately, because that's a sign that your blood pressure's dropping, which obviously I was on the monitor. As soon as I lay down, I could feel the nausea coming on, and I said that, and the anesthesiologist nurse, there was the anesthesiologist, and then he had a nurse, and she was amazing. I wish I knew her name. I would give her a million stars. She was the best support person in the OR. She was incredible. And they started pushing stuff to bring my blood pressure up, but it wasn't coming up fast enough. And I remember looking over at one point, and my blood pressure was 60/30. And I could start feeling myself. I knew I was going to pass out, because I passed out once before. And my doctor said, how are you feeling? And I said, I feel like I'm going to pass out. I have the tunnel vision, the ears, my hearing's going. And she was like, push this, push that. And they were, but it just wasn't coming up fast enough. And the nurse, she started waving an alcohol swab in front of my nose, and she said, take deep breaths, take deep breaths. And I did, and that's when I started feeling better, and that gave the medicine time to kick in and bring my blood pressure back up where it was supposed to be. So, I mean, it wouldn't have been a big deal if I'd passed out. It was just a weird sensation, but they totally prepped me for that and responded great. They were wonderful. I remember laying there when Brandon came in, and he was like, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm good. And I remember Dr. Blevin stepping up, and she was like, they were making jokes because she was talking about she was the shortest one in the OR, and she needed a block to stand on to operate, and we were all kind of laughing at that. And I remember her standing up, and I could tell she was kind of prepping me, but I could still feel her, but not great. And but I thought she was getting ready to cut me, and I said, I'm still able to feel that. Is that normal? And she said, oh yeah, we're not cutting yet. But then after probably about 10 minutes or so, the anesthesiologist, he said, I'm going to tell me when you can't feel this. And he started poking me up the side, and I didn't have any sensation. So he said, you're ready to go. And Dr. Bleda stepped up, and she was like, let's have this baby. So she started doing her thing, and one thing that was different this time is our hospital offered clear drapes. Or drapes that would turn into clear drapes. So when they put it up, it was the typical blue, and I couldn't see anything. But when they were getting ready to deliver, the nurse took it down so it was clear, and I should have been able to see him delivered. Or, at least see some of what was going on. Well, they were, all the way in, and the nurse actually thought they were getting ready to deliver him, because that's the point they would typically deliver. And she said, okay, Dad, you can stand up and watch him be born. And then she asked if I wanted my thing down, and I did, so she put it down. And Dr. Blevins realized that he was not descended, he was floating up in my rib cage. So there was no way this baby was coming by Z-back, number one. So we definitely made the right decision on a C-section. But number two, she could not get him down. And she said, we're going to have to use some manpower. So the nurses had to jump on me. I had one nurse jump over my head. There were nurses on the side. I think there were 6 people total that were trying to force him down. I mean, they were pushing. I thought I was going to throw up all over the nurse, bless her heart. And, they were laying some pressure. And Brandon was standing and watching all this, and he was like, he said later, he was like, I don't know how you handle that, even not being able to feel it. And I'm like, well, you don't have a choice, so. But they were pushing, he still was not coming down. And she said, okay, we're going to use the vacuum on him and get him down a little more. So she vacuumed him, and he descended some, from what I understand, but he was still not, did not want to come out. So both of my sons I delivered just like being stuck. They are comfortable in the womb and they don't want to come out. But she was like, anesthesia, jump in, and like some of the anesthesia team had to jump on, and there were just these nurses just pushing and putting so much pressure on me and trying to get this little baby out. And finally he came out, and I couldn't really see, like I could see my doctor and like the nurses that were on me, but because of them I couldn't really see him be delivered. But they got him out, and it scared me because they didn't put him up over the curtain to see me. They immediately handed him off to the pediatric team, and he cried, but not like a really forceful cry. And I remember looking sideways, and he was like blue or purple. He was like not a good color. But he was crying. He was like whimpering, and I was like, "Is he okay? Is he okay?" And they were obviously just working on him. And I told Brandon, I was like, ask if he's okay, go see if he's okay, check on him, make sure he's okay, is he alright? And they were just working on him, and he was perfectly fine. There was nothing wrong with him. But thankfully he perked up and he started crying, and he was fine. It just kind of took him a bit. And then another thing that had scared me, Dr. Blevins, I remember hearing her saying he has a knot in his umbilical cord. He had twisted himself in the womb and knotted his umbilical cord up. And Brandon was able to see that, because when he stood up to see him, he saw him delivered, he got to see his cord and everything, and he was able to see the little knot in his cord. So that was interesting, but thankfully it was not a big deal. She said it's kind of common, and he was fine. Once they got everything going good, I remember thinking, he's little, and I thought his legs are so short, but they are like fat. And that is still true today. He is short, but he's just like, has these little chunky rolls. He's just so sweet and yummy. So after I knew he was okay, I was like, what time was it? What time was it? And he was born at 12:06 p.m. Then they went to do his length. He was 19 inches exactly. And then they did his weight, and I could see the weight, but they had to keep redoing it because he was wiggling. And then when it finally came up in grams. And I'm like, how big is that? And they went and converted it, and he was 7 pounds and 12 ounces. So they wrapped him up, and one moment I don't think I'll ever forget, they wrapped him up, and they handed him to Brandon, and Brandon was holding him. And then he turned him around to me, and when I started speaking, Tatum started moving his head, looking for me, because he knew my voice. And that was just the sweetest moment for me, knowing that he knew his mommy's voice. And Brandon put him down on me, and, I kind of reached up and held him the best that I could, and I was talking, and he'd just look at me. We had kind of held him for a little bit. They had to take him to the nursery, and, like, give him his Hep B shot, and, like, his eye ointment, and things like that, and just make sure he was checked out really good. And they took him to do that, and got me back to recovery. So I sat in recovery and waited. And a lot of our family was there. They were in the waiting room. Our hospital had blue restrictions in place, but thankfully they were not super, super strict about like under 18s being able to come, because they knew, siblings wanted to meet their baby siblings. So, and we had some wonderful nurses who let people come on back and see me in recovery. While I was in recovery, Brandon went out and kind of updated our families, and let them know, we'd bring them back when we could and things like that. So we wanted our sons to be the first to meet Tatum. So we brought Derek, Lucas, and Derek's girlfriend back, and they were the first ones in the recovery room to be able to meet him, and it was just the sweetest little reunion, especially with Lucas. We talked about the baby, and he was excited about the baby, but to actually see him and how he acted was super sweet. And then our oldest son, just to see him, hold him and cuddle him, and have a genuine smile. And Derek's girlfriend, she's just part of our family, and she was wonderful with him. So that was a blessing to be able to have everyone there with us. So they came and saw me in recovery. Brandon's parents were there. My sister-in-law was there, and brother-in-law came later. Our preacher was there, and my mom was able to stop by for a few minutes to see us in the hospital. So everyone just kind of rotated in to meet him, and everyone actually met him while we were in recovery. And then I was in recovery probably a couple of hours before they moved me to my room. And once they moved me to my room, our family kind of came and went. They didn't really do a lot of limiting, which I'm so thankful for. Lucas had to wear a mask when he was in the hall, but in the room he could just kind of hang with us, which was really neat. So we were really thankful for everyone that was there for his birth, and in the hours and days afterwards, Brandon's parents kept Lucas for us for several nights, even after we came home, to kind of help us get adjusted. So that was a big blessing. Our hospital stay was great. We had good nurses. I had good care. Recovering from a C-section, I kind of knew what to expect, but in a way I felt the recovery was more difficult, and in a way I felt like it was kind of not as difficult because I knew what to expect this time. But we actually stayed one night. Most C-sections stay 2 or 3, but my doctor, I was doing really well, thankfully, and she offered to let me go home after one night. If I wanted to, she left it up to me. And I actually told myself, given the option, I would stay an extra night. Because with Lucas, we stayed one night, and I regretted it. I wish I would have stayed a second. But I was so ready to get out of there again, I said, let's go home. And I'm glad that we did. We actually did not get discharged until like after 8 o'clock, and we had over an hour ride home. We didn't get home until after 10 o'clock that night. But I'm really glad we did. We actually had a decent first night home. With Lucas, we did not. It was a really rough night. But with Tatum, we had a decent first night home. That is kind of his birth story. Oh, another thing that I did not realize that hospitals, or a lot of hospitals, are phasing out is hospital photos. We opted to not have Fresh 48 done because of the flu restrictions that were in place at the hospital, and we didn't want to chance having them done without Lucas and Derek there with us. Well, Lucas, because Derek's over 18, so he could have been there, but we were afraid that Lucas couldn't be there, and we didn't want to take that chance. So I did snap some of my own Fresh 48 photos just to have, but they did not do hospital photos, like with their name and stuff, which I was so bummed about. I love those photos, and we obviously have them for Luke and Derek, but they don't do those anymore at our hospital, so. And that is Tatum Samuel's birth vlog. He was born Wednesday, February 12th at 12:06 p.m. by C-section, 19 inches long, 7 pounds, 12 ounces.